Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to Bayliss Public Library. My name is Ken Miller, the library director. As usual, I'd like to start off with some thank yous, some upcoming events, and then introduce our speaker, Gary Schmidt, tonight. And our first thank you goes to Gary Schmidt for coming tonight, for speaking, and for reducing your honorarium. Thank you for that. And a special thanks to Pam Mativer of JKL Batawing School. I shouldn't read it, I should just say it, shouldn't I? For letting us know that Gary was coming, because if you guys hadn't mentioned that to us, we would not have been able to have you tonight, Gary. The Michigan Center for the Book for their grant support. Book World for supplying books for sale and donating 20% to the library. And Friends of the Library for the refreshments and for the photography help. Friends of the Library, thank you guys very much. I'd like to thank especially the staff tonight, because we're not open tonight and the staff doesn't usually work on Friday nights, but our staff has come in to make this happen. So I have the greatest staff in the world, the greatest staff I've ever worked with, so thank you guys very, very much. Yes. Tonight we are very pleased to have Michigan Author of the Year, Gary Schmidt, with us tonight. His books have twice won the Newbery Honor Award, which is the most prestigious award for children's literature. I've never met a Newbery Award winner before, and it's really a pleasure to have you here, Gary. His newest book, Okay for Now, was a finalist for the National Book Award and is a companion book to the Newbery Honor winning The Wednesday Wars. The Michigan Center for the Book named Gary as the winner of the 2011 Michigan Author Award. Gary Schmidt has a PhD in medieval literature and is a professor of English at Calvin College in Grand Rapids. He's written textbooks and picture books, biography, fantasy, folk tales, and historical fiction. He does his writing on a 1953 Royal typewriter, hence our display in the lobby, because it slows him down. I just wanted to add, if you really want to be slowed down, just try and learn Windows 7, and that'll do it for you. Copies of some of his books will be available for purchase and signing after his talk. And tonight he will speak about why writing for our children matters more than you may think. Please join me in welcoming Gary Schmidt.
Thank you, folks. And thank you for coming tonight. This is my second time up here. The last time it was snowing. But today you have the daffodils out. That really is very nice of you. Thank you for arranging that.
A couple days ago it would have been snowing also.
Oh, really? Oh, well, I guess I missed it. We have had hardly any snow in Grand Rapids. I think we have about half of what you normally get here, and I think we ended up with about 18, 19 inches all winter long, which is so bizarre for us that it's hard to imagine. It's very good to be here with you. I come from a sort of writerly family, a family that likes to tell stories. In fact, many of you here, I suspect, know the work of at least my uncle. His name is Brad Smith, and though you may not know his name, I suspect you perhaps have seen his work. There was a show before Sesame Street came on that taught us all how to watch television that was really for children, and it was called Captain Kangaroo. Anyone remember that? That was my uncle. He wrote that show. His name was Brad Smith, and we would watch it in my house all the time just to see his name scroll by at the end of the credits. Even when I was in high school, long past the age that you would watch Captain Kangaroo, I would still watch it just because there were his words on the screen, and there was his name at the end. It was a huge thing. I mean, Uncle Brad, there he was, and we were very close. And I thought, wow, to be a writer, that'll do. That would be a cool thing to be. When it came time to choose a college, Brad took me out to dinner, and he said, you know, Gary, I'm on the board of admissions over to Harvard. I'm sure I can get you in. And after a moment, I thought, Brad, if I go there, I will never know if I went to Harvard because I got in or because you got me in. And he paused and said, "You're such an idiot. You don't even deserve to go." And our conversation declined after that. I was 17. And so about 35 years went by, and we didn't talk. And that's a long time, 35 years. And so, at the end of 35 years, just a few years ago now, I thought, wow, he's in his mid-80s. Maybe I should say hi after 3.5 decades after this argument that we had. And I was going to New York. And so I called him up, and I said, "How about we meet?" And he goes, "Sure," which I was so surprised at. And I said, "Let's meet by the Lions at the Fifth Avenue Library." And he goes, "Okay, we'll meet there." So that day, I went down Fifth Avenue. I went about 30 minutes early, because if you get to someplace early and you're waiting for someone, then that person who comes after you sort of feels guilty, and you have the high moral plane. So I figured I'll get there 30 minutes early and I'm good. I'm walking down Fifth Avenue, and dang, there he is. He's standing by the Lions, his hair blowing in the wind, his white hair now. He's had a stroke. He's struggling with walking. But there he was, Brad Smith. Couldn't believe it. And he took me to a Pinky Up restaurant behind the library, and we talked. And he told stories. And he told stories about being a child, which I had never heard before. Stories like this one. He is walking down from a small house up in Maine into Dover Foxcroft, a small town in Maine. And he's just on a dirt road. He's with my grandfather, who I never knew, who always carried a rifle with him, always. And as they're walking down into Dover Foxcroft, a red-tailed hawk lights on the rail of a fence. And my grandfather hands Brad the rifle, and he says, "Shoot him." Brad's 11 at the time. All stories like this always end the same way, don't they? They always end the same way. He takes the rifle, and though he's 11 and can't shoot the dang thing, can hardly lift it, he levels it and pulls the trigger and watches as this bird suddenly in his chest just bursts. He's hit it directly in the chest. It spreads its wings and begins to fall. But before it falls off the rail, before it hits the dirt there, another red-tailed hawk comes down and lights on the post and gives this awful, awful screech. And then it's dead. And the red-tailed hawk on the post watches, and flies away. And my Uncle Brad hands the gun back to my grandfather and says, "I killed the daddy." Years go by. He is drafted, goes to war in Korea, and comes back. Between the time he leaves and comes back, my grandfather has died, and no one has gone into his study since. He comes home to his mother's house, my grandmother, and my mother is also still there now, his sister. And they celebrate, of course. He's back from war, of course. And he waits that night until my grandmother and my mother go to sleep. It's late. But after they go up, and after he knows they're asleep, he goes into my grandfather's study. He opens the desk drawer, pulls out the key to the gun cabinet. He opens the gun cabinet. He takes every rifle, every handgun, and all the ammunition, everything he can find in there, and loads it into his Ford. And that night, around 2 a.m., he drives through the streets of Manhattan and goes down to the river and lobs all those guns into the East River, every single one, where they still are. As he's telling me this, I'm watching him, and he says, "Gary, I was weeping." And I said, "Because of Korea?" And he says, "No, because of the red-tailed hawk." He was 11 when it happened. As he's telling me that story, he's weeping again. We're in this Pinky Up restaurant with all these things going on around us. That bird has been dead for 70 years. Wars have been fought, nations have been divided and reunited, empires have risen and fallen on the world stage in all that time. But he's crying in that Pinky Up restaurant just a couple of years ago for the red-tailed hawk he killed when he was 11 years old. We carry our childhood with us, don't we? Everyone here has a story sort of like that. As soon as you think of it, everything that's involved in that, the whole constellation of emotions comes together, all of it. Even with the books that we find. Have you had the experience of coming up with seeing a children's book that you had when you were 5 or 6 and haven't thought about it again? And suddenly you pull it up and dang, there it is. Every emotion, and not just the emotions, the smell of the book, the feel of the pages, all that comes back. The fact that you sat on a carpet square while Mrs. Harknett read it to you, all of it's back. It's quite astonishing. Why do we write for children? Why does that matter? Because you remember it forever. The books that you read in your childhood are the books that you have in your heart and in your head forever. If I was to quiz you tonight, I won't do this, but if I was to quiz you tonight and gave you a series of questions about books that you may have read as children, everyone here would have no trouble. So, George has a friend. George's friend wears a hat. What color is the hat?
Yellow.
Yellow. George is a monkey. He's a monkey. When's the last time you thought of that? And yet there it is. The Cat in the Hat has 3 colors in all of its illustrations. What are they? You guys don't count. You can't do this. What are they? Red, white, black outline.
Yellow.
Yellow if you see the first edition, but not the later ones. Blue. Red, white, and blue. And we could go on and on like this. It wouldn't be hard. Amelia, Delia, and bang, there it is. Stories that we haven't thought of for so long, but they're right there. Sometimes it doesn't work, but usually it does. They're right there. Someone who writes for kids, tries to write for kids as much as possible. I think a lot about what that means. What does it matter? What do books matter to you? What difference does it make? Today at the school I told this story, and here's a big reason why it matters. Maybe some of you like me had a system in your school where you were tracked. And in first grade, we were tracked. I see a few nods here. That means that in first grade, guys, in first grade, it's decided whether or not you are smart enough to go on to college or not. And so there was track 1, and that track was the kids who were going on to college because they were smart. Track 2 was the kids who may get an okay job but probably won't go on to college. But they get an okay job because they're okay. And track 3 was the kids who were going to serve at McDonald's for the rest of their lives. Everyone knew it. And I was track 3. I was the kid in the worst reading group. I was the kid that was in track 3. And it was decided in September of first grade. First grade, your destiny is laid out in front of you. We think this only happens somewhere else, but it happened here quite a bit. What that meant for me was that I was always in the last group to get the books. I was always in the group that got the worst teachers because we were just going to serve at McDonald's anyway. We were always the group that was at the end of everything, and we knew it. We were the pumpkin group. I don't remember what the other vegetables were, but I remember my group, and we were the pumpkins. There was a teacher named Miss Kavikoff who was in a different part of the building who just liked me. And we were in 4th grade. She just sort of liked me. And somehow, and I have no idea how this happened, I still don't know to this day, somehow she got me away from Miss Hanrahan's class into her class. And she brought me in there. She taught track 1. In 4th grade, I didn't know how to read. I was a pumpkin. I wasn't going to need to know how to read. I was a pumpkin. Dang, pumpkin. And so she stuffed my desk with books. We had those old desks, wooden desks, and just stuff into them. The desks were so old that we still had the holes cut in front for, you remember? For ink pens. Yeah, it really made me feel old even then. And little by little, in 4th grade, she would just spend a lot of time with me. And we would read through books, mostly that were too young for me, but books that were fantastic. I couldn't believe it. She gave me Bambi. a book that hardly anyone reads today, but is, I think, one of the most sophisticated books I've ever read in my life. She gave me some really easy books by Virginia Call. She gave me Fortunately, Unfortunately. It's still one of my favorite books. And on, and saved my life. And somehow I'm not at McDonald's tonight, serving you a Big Mac, which you should never eat anyway. But I'm here, and it's fantastic. It's just so wonderful. So, writing for children. I have 3 rules for it, and I'll give these to you pretty easily, and we'll see how it goes from there, and then I'll talk about some of the books. Here's the first rule. There is a Victorian writer named John Ruskin, and he wrote probably the most boring books ever conceived in the English language. No one should ever have to read them. With few exceptions, I can think of hardly anyone who has written more boring books than John Ruskin has written. But in one little essay, he changes. The essay was not published until after his lifetime. It occurs in volume 4 of his collected works. So when you go home tonight, look for volume 4 in his collected works. I'm sure they're on your shelves. And it's a small essay called Science and Art, which has a really boring title. Who would read that? As you go through the essay, it's as boring as sin, until finally he stops, and literally there's a break in the page. And he says this: I have one thing to tell you, just one thing, and one thing that I am eager for you to know. I really want you to know this. He really just steps out of the book and really says, I really want you to know this. And you're thinking, dang, what is it? And he says this: you will never learn to love art well until you learn to love what art mirrors, the world. Unless you love the world and all that's in it, you're never going to love art. You have to first love the world. I think that's true. I think any writer who's working well in a book loves all the characters, all the scenarios, the setting, everything about it. Loves that. If J.K. herself were here right now, I say it just like I know her, J.K. Rowling, I have to say J.K. I have a letter from her secretary, by the way. Pretty impressive, huh? Yeah. If she were here and someone was to say, J.K., do you love Voldemort? I promise you, she would say, absolutely. Absolutely, I love Voldemort. Absolutely. She would probably say, my heart breaks for him. I think that's Ruskin. You have to love the world and everything in the world before you write, and most especially for a young audience. If you're cynical, this is not your audience. If you're disdainful, if you're angry, write for politics. But don't write for kids. And that's my first rule. Love the world first. Love everything in it. And after all, folks, it's really not that hard, is it? All you have to do is walk down the road, and there's so much to love. Second rule. We are at the Rhode Island School of Design right now, and we are a class of about 150 people. We have paid big bucks to have a class taught by the illustrator Barry Moser. It's now about 10 minutes into class, and Barry Moser hasn't shown up. And we're all waiting. And suddenly, bang, the doors open, and Barry walks down the middle aisle. He's a big guy. Walks down the middle aisle. Doesn't say anything to anyone. Comes to the front. Throws books down. Still doesn't say anything. Turns to the board, and with his back to us, for about 10 minutes, draws on this chalkboard an apple. An apple. He steps back, he looks at the apple, he steps forward, he works on it, and then when he's finally done, 10 minutes, he walks to the back of the classroom, and he makes some noises. And then he comes back out and he erases it. Gone. And he starts again. He starts again. Another 10 minutes drawing the apple. And when he's finally done, and we're now about half an hour into the class and he hasn't spoken to anyone, he's finally got this apple finished, he turns to us and he goes, "What's on the board?" And people are figuring, this is pretty obvious, and they say, "It's an apple." And he goes, "No," kind of annoyed. "No." And people are thinking, dang, he's really not that good an illustrator if that's not an apple. What's going on with that? No, he goes, what's on the board? And people figure, okay, it's got to be, something else. So a nectarine. And people start to guess around, what's the kind of fruit on the board there? And every time someone answers it, he goes, no, no. And then finally someone gets the idea. He wants us to be specific. And the artist has to be specific. So it's not an apple. And someone goes, a Mac. And he goes, no. And someone says, another kind. No. And finally now class is almost over. You paid a lot of money for this. And there it is. And he finally yells, what's on the board? And someone says, what is it?
Ink. Chalk.
Chalk. It's chalk.
That's last.
Chalk is on the board. Chalk is on the board. And then he says, if you want to be an artist, you have to love the material of your craft. You have to love the chalk, the pencils, the paint, the paintbrushes. You have to love the paper. You have to love the smell of it, the feel of it, the touch. You have to love the material of your craft. If you're a writer, you have to love the material of your craft, words. You have to love words. You have to love how words work together. You have to love how they create meaning. Dang, they create meaning. Somehow I can conjure in your head meaning. And I can direct the meaning. I can make you choose one meaning over another. So, I bring in a cage. And in this cage is covered. And I take off the cover. And I hold out a rabbit. The rabbit has the number 5 written on its side. It's a white rabbit. And I put the rabbit down on the floor. Of all those images, what strikes you?
The number 5.
The number 5. I can put that one, just with a word. Everyone in the room saw a white rabbit with a number 5, and in your head you're going, what's that about? Was there a 4? Was there a 1? Words are amazing. Look what they do. How astonishing. The way I can make the sounds work, the way I can make rhythm work, even in prose. The fact that I can slow you down just by changing the vowels. I can slow down how quickly you read through the page. I can make you read fast. I can make you read slow. That's amazing what words can do, just by the sounds you employ. You have to love words if you're going to be a writer. Third rule. A lot of times I get the question is, where do you get an idea? Where do ideas come from? I wish it was simple. I wish I could say, see it in a rule book. Or there's some catalog. Or today there's some Google site where you've got all of these amazing ideas waiting for it. And of course it isn't like that. But where do ideas come from? At the end of the greatest book ever written in America, Walden, Henry David Thoreau. It is, by the way, Thoreau, not Thoreau. Thoreau would have hated to be called Thoreau. Just saying. At the end of that greatest book in all of America, there's this amazing little story he throws in just at the end. And it's the story of these two farmers, it's a farmer and his wife story. It's a farmer and his wife, and they're sitting at a table made out of apple woods. They've been there for who knows how long. That table is at least 100 years old. And they put a tea kettle on the table, Thoreau says. And suddenly they start to hear something. They start to hear something, and it's inside the table. It's inside the table. And they take the tea kettle off, and they're watching, and they're listening, and there's something in the table. Eventually, they start to see sawdust coming up through this. It's 100 years old, this applewood table. And as they watch, a beetle emerges, blue wings. It comes out from this table, and the sunlight hits it, and it's beautiful. It's this beautiful blue beetle that has emerged by the warmth of the kettle. After waiting for 100 years, that beetle has suddenly emerged, and it flies out of the table and flies out the window. And Thoreau says, whose heart is not made larger by that? Whose heart is not made larger by that story? And he goes on to say this, we live to wake up. You have to be awake. That's what writing is all about. That's what life is all about. Being awake. We live in a culture which is filled with bright lights, which is filled with speed, which is filled with loud noises. We live in that culture right now. None of that is to wake us up. All of that is to put us to sleep. In the political world, in the aesthetic world, in so many different worlds, is to put us to sleep. None of it is to wake us up. You go to an airport today, can you find a single spot anywhere in an airport where CNN isn't screaming at you? And you say, really? Does Wolf Blitzer have to have an inroad to me all the time? Is the Situation Room really all that important? Never. Never, ever is it that important. We live in a culture where there's lots that are coming out of us. And Thoreau is saying, guys, wake up. Stay awake. Watch what's around you. To be a writer, you have to watch. You have to watch what's happening and to be aware. And that's not something that's easy these days. I'm at a talk once, I'm not even sure what state it's in. And it's a hard talk because it's going to be about 400 eighth graders. They're going to be on stands in a gym, which is where you're supposed to make noise. And I'm thinking, wow, 400 eighth graders, this is going to be really interesting. There is, by the way, no mic either in this place. So I'm standing there watching as all these eighth graders come in, and they are so up because, they're out of class. They're so excited they're out of class. And they're filling up these stands. And there's a kiddo who sits down by himself on the first step there, on the first stand. People are coming by, he's just by himself. Now, suddenly, next to him, 2 girls sit down. They are also eighth graders. And they're up too. They're just happy. People are flying by. They're all just sort of hollering back and forth with the people they know. They're getting noises back, and they're just really, really excited. This kid has no idea what to do. And I watch him as he sort of slowly moves back in the bleacher, pushes himself back, and then, what's the worst possible thing that can happen in that situation for that kid? The worst thing that can happen. 2 guys sit down on his other side. And they're up too. And they know these 2 girls. And they start flirting back and forth. And they start being up all around him. And these 2 girls start to lean into this one kid. And the 2 guys are leaning into this one kid. And this kid, he pushes himself further and further back on the bleacher step, back to the one behind him. Until, no kidding, by the time I'm about to start, I can only see this kid's legs. That's all that's left of this kid. He is completely behind these 2 guys who have moved over, these 2 girls who have moved over, who are really having a good time. They're not being mean. Who are just having a good time together. But he's erased. He's erased. Now, is that a story? Is that a story? I've never forgotten it. Someday I'll use it. That image is so powerful for me of this kid who is essentially erased. Not essentially, completely erased. Because these 2 kids are out. We stay awake. We watch for the things that are going to be interesting. The story that's going to be intriguing to us. And that's the kind of thing that works. The kind of thing that was going to generate a question. Every so often you hear someone say, what's writing about? And the answer that is, well, you write what you know about. Right? You write what you know. No. You don't do that. You already know that. Writing is all about writing about what you want to know. You write what you want to know, not what you already know. Writing is always about discovery. Why else do it? If you know it, okay, you know it, so you're done. But if you want to know it, if you want to figure it out, that's what writing should be. So, those are the 3 rules. Now, how does that all work itself out? And I'll talk just about a couple of the books and how they got started and what they're all about, and then we can go from there. And then perhaps we can even talk, which would be fun. Okay for Now is the latest one, and it's set in New York, in Long Island, actually in Marysville, New York, in upstate. The real town is Ellenville, New York, where I worked as a camp director and a camp counselor for all high school and all of college. It was a fantastic little camp in the Catskill Mountains. Where I first began this story, it was really in Flint Public Library. And Flint in Michigan is, as you all know this, Flint is now America's most violent city. Flint, Michigan. Flint, Michigan. America's most violent city. It's not New York, as you might expect, or any other city. It's Flint. In the middle of that violence, in the sea of that, there's a small campus that has an art museum and some art schools and the library, which stays open late at night because people need it to stay open late at night. And these librarians, with not a whole lot of funding, do amazing projects, amazing gigs. And I'm there one day between two school groups when I'm walking around the library, 20 minutes to spare. And in the middle of that library, in a small hall, not a room, but it's a hall, there is a case the size of that table over there, maybe wider, glass case. And I look in, and there is John James Audubon's Birds of America. If that was a first edition, it wasn't. But if it was, that is a $12 to $14 million book. It's the most beautiful book in the world. It's an amazing sequence. 435 beautiful life-size plates of American birds. There were 600 made in the 1820s and 30s. Today, there are 118 left. The reason is that dealers, when they get them, can't sell. I mean, who's going to buy a $12, $14 million book? But they can sell each individual plate. And over the years, you get the books, 4 volumes, you open it up, and they're truly this big, this wide, this tall. You just take a razor blade, you cut out each one, and you hold it up. And the most important ones, like the American turkey or the American flamingo, will go between $150,000 and $200,000 for the page. And there are 435 of those pages. You make a lot more by destroying the book than by keeping it intact. And that's why over 400 of them have been destroyed. In any case, I see this one. It's a later one. His wife did it after his death to make some money, and then took the plates, the original plates, and sold them. The year is 1861. What do you think she sold them for? Bullets. So the plates could be melted down and made into bullets. It's the Civil War. And they're saved at the very last minute by a guy who was about to melt them down, saw what they were, and they still exist. This guy saved them. And it's a good story as well. And they're in a museum, I think, in New York now. In any case, this book that's right here is about a $500,000 book. And I asked, guys, $500,000. It's a lot of money. Why don't you sell this? And the librarians of Flint, Michigan said, no, because someday we're going to recover, and then the book wouldn't be here for the next generation. These are the people who should be running Congress right now. It's an amazing decision. $500,000. And they say, no, because we want to keep the book. On the way home, I hear an NPR report, and it's a story about a junior high where there is, on the wall in the auditorium, a mural by N.C. Wyeth, one of our most important American artists. This mural has been there as a donation since the 1930s. So about 80 years of kids have gone through that auditorium seeing a beautiful mural, original painting by N.C. Wyeth every day. Imagine living with that. It's incredible. And this school was trying to decide, should we keep it or should we sell it? If we keep it, we have to pay insurance, we have to worry about cleaning it, and it's a junior high library. Could something happen to it? I guess. Or should we sell it and get $1 million and have an endowment and have a couple more teachers? A good goal. And eventually this place decided, you can guess, to sell. And so the picture was sold and now is held in private hands, and no one sees it other than whoever bought it, which breaks my heart. That's the same story. Exactly the same story. The first, keep it. The second, sell it. So there I am standing in the Flint Public Library, and I think of a kiddo who comes upon this book, and the pages are torn off, 9 of them. And this kid, he's beat up. He's a beat up kid. Hard family, hard school life, everything is hard for him. Is it possible, he wonders, in this world, if anything could be whole? Is there one thing that in his life that could be not beat up, like this book? Could possibly, he could make this whole again? And so the story of OK for Now is really about that question. Is it possible in this world for us to put something back together in such a way that it is whole again. Can that really ever be done? And that's the story of the book. He goes in search of the 9 sheets, the 9 pages that have been taken out with no resources, trying to find a way to put them all back in the book. And each chapter is about one of those pages until the last chapter, to see if it's possible to become whole. Both the book and, of course, himself. The book that precedes this is called Wednesday Wars, and it's set in 1967, 1968, our most violent year in America, during Vietnam, about a kiddo who has this most awful thing happen to him. And it's what happened to me in that same year. 6th grade. In my 6th grade year, when Wednesday comes along at 1:30, every kid in my classroom who was Jewish, which was most of the kids, got up and left, and they go to get ready for bar mitzvahs and such, Hebrew school. Soon after that, every kid who is Lutheran and every kid who is Catholic, they get up too, and they go off to their school, to catechism. That means that only those kids who are not Jewish or Lutheran or Catholic remain in the school. And in my school, that was me. I was the entire Protestant Reformation. All by myself. And it really was the case. In this classroom, Mrs. Baker was up here, and I was back there, and she looked at me, and I knew that she hated me. Because, after all, if I'm gone, 2 hours every Wednesday, hers. She has no obligation. I'm gone, if I was gone. But I'm sitting there, and as all the other teachers leave, there am I, and Mrs. Baker, and I knew she hated my guts. And it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing when you know that your teacher hates your guts. But I knew it, and she did. She was really a very mean person. So, Mrs. Baker decides to make me useful, and she turns me into the classroom janitor. And so for those Wednesday afternoons, for 2 hours, for the first part of those grades, I cleaned the classroom. I went back and I took care of the rats. I went to our cloak room. I cleaned out the lunches. I washed the windows. I washed the chalkboards. Remember doing this? I bet everyone here did something. I went out and I took the erasers. Remember this? You take the chalk erasers and you go outside and you pound them against each other, or you pound them against the wall, the brick walls, and the chalk dust. Remember that? I did that. You still do it. I swept. I fixed bulletin boards. I did all sorts of stuff. And the first day when I was all done, I went up to the front desk and I said, I'm finished. And she goes, huh? And she opens up her desk drawer and she takes out a razor blade and passes it across the desk to me. And I pick it up. And the razor blade was for what?
Gum under the desk.
Exactly. It was for gum underneath the desk. And when my friends found out that I was scraping gum from underneath their desks, well, you don't have to be a Calvinist to know what they did. Suddenly all this gum is appearing under the desks and under the chairs. And that's what I'm doing on the day that our principal walks in, Mr. Jeanette, who walks in, looks at me, doesn't know my name, he just goes, what is he doing? Looks at Mrs. Baker, and he's angry. You should be doing something educational. And she says, well, he's all by himself. It's not like I can teach him anything. And he's really angry. And he starts to yell at her. It was fabulous. I sat, I watched, it was fantastic. I'm sitting at Ernie Hupfer's desk, and she's getting yelled at. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. When I still have to conjure up happiness, I still think of that moment in my life. It was fantastic. Anyway, he closes the door and leaves, having said you have to do something, educational. And she looks at me, and she's just been yelled at by her boss. This does not build good relationships. And she decides, in fact, that I'm done with the razor blade. But she comes to me from out her desk, she takes her out from out her desk, a book, this huge book. And she brings it to my desk. She thumps it down, and she opens it up. And it is The Tragedy of Macbeth. And she goes, read this. And I read Macbeth and many Shakespeare plays, 2 hours every Wednesday. I was in 6th grade. 2 hours every Wednesday through that grade. And I never told her what was really true, was that I loved it. She never asked me about it, we never discussed it, we never talked about it. She sat at her desk, did whatever she did, I sat at my desk reading Shakespeare. It was fabulous. It was amazing. And for a kiddo growing up in junior high, growing up during the war, it was a big deal. It was a big deal. If there were words I didn't get, I just blew them off. If there were scenes I didn't like, I just turned the page. Characters who were boring, Polonius, really? You blow them off. Characters you can't figure out, the clowns in any of the plays, Much Ado, I just blew them off. But I loved the stories. I loved them. And they meant a lot to me. And they were, on some level, almost frightening. Imagine being in middle school and you read Romeo and Juliet, which is really about two middle school kids who can't find their way around the block, but it's still about them. And you think about what happens to them. Is it really the case, really, is it really the case that one little thing can happen, just one little thing, and all your life is changed? Wow. If you're in junior high and you get that message, one tiny little thing, and your life is changed. And the answer is yes. Everyone in this room knows that. You get the phone call from your doctor. I'm sorry, the test results have come back, and it shows that, and your life is different. One little thing, and suddenly everything is changed. That was the message of Romeo and Juliet for me. Or the story of Shylock in Merchant of Venice. What a frightener of a play. Do you remember that play? Is it possible that a group, an outside group, could define you, and that you come to believe it? You come to believe what that group says about you, and you accept what they say. Is that possible? I guess. Because that's what happens in that play. Shylock is defined by other people, and he comes to believe it. Do you think that's important for a middle school kid to hear? That other people can define you, and maybe you'll accept that? I guess. Or my favorite play, other than The Tempest, Much Ado About Nothing. I think an amazing play. If you remember the play, or seen the movie, Denzel Washington, it's really quite astounding what happens there. There's Benedict and Beatrice, and they'll marry at the end, and they'll be fine. And there is stupid Claudio and stupid a hero, and they'll marry, and they'll be fine because they're both stupid together. But as they go off to be married, the prince, he doesn't go. He stays back, and the next day, he will torture his brother to death, and he will be completely alone. That's the end of that play. And what does that say? I remember thinking it so clearly, that marriage and love, it is what we are made for. It is what we are as human beings to do. It is what we are destined to do. It seems. Because marriage and love, though they are so wonderful, it's not promised. No promise that that will happen in your life. Wow. Those plays, they did a lot for me. So, I am, years later, having failed to write a comedy in the previous book that I had worked at to try and make a comedy, I really wanted to write something that I thought was funny, or that I thought could be funny. And so I'm driving down Route 95, and this image just comes, and this never happens to me, of a 7th grader who's running a cross-country race. I love cross-country, that's pure sport there is. And he's running this race, and there are 4 8th graders ahead of him, and they're spanning the path. And he's actually a better runner than any of them. He's actually good, but they're 8th graders. And 7th graders don't pass 8th graders. They just don't. He's afraid of them. And as he's running, he comes around a bend, and there is this teacher. And guys, the teacher was Mrs. Baker. It was like this demon that was haunting me. There she was. And she yells at this kiddo, get in front of those boys. And because he's afraid of Mrs. Baker, more afraid than he is of the 8th graders, he does. He runs in front of them. The whole scene just came really clearly. I don't know if he wins or not. Didn't matter. The scene was just right. Somehow I wanted to know who this kid was, why Mrs. Baker's out in the woods yelling at him, why he's afraid of her, the whole thing. What's going on with that? And that became the Wednesday Wars, set during a time when I think it was really important to think about the world around you growing up. Those of you who are close to my age will remember what it's like to be in junior high when you're growing up. You'll remember that there are 100,000 people on the mall in Washington every Saturday. You may remember that New York Times in the spring of 1968, on Saturday issue, publishes the names of all the boys shot and killed that last week in Vietnam. Every Saturday, the New York Times publishes those names. In the spring of '68, 250 names every week. 250 names every single week. So when Martin Luther King is shot and killed, on the day his assassin is discovered and arrested, Bobby Kennedy, who had ended the war, is shot and killed. And you think, wow, what a crazy, crazy place. What is it like to grow up in junior high during wartime? Which is what our kids are doing right now. Though the war is hidden from them so cleverly, so slickly, it's still wartime. And our kids are growing up in that. What does that do? How does that change them? I think that's an important question to ask. So, those are the last two books, or actually two of the most recent books, and they always begin with those questions to try and figure out how this all works. Why is this important in our culture? Well, I'll tell you one story of one school visit. I'm at Houghton Lake, which is not that far from here. And I've gone up from Grand Rapids, driven up during that evening, during that day and evening, to have a gig the next day at Houghton Lake Schools. On the way up, it's April, it's snowing, it's icing, and I'm driving about 5 miles an hour, and it's like, oh man, I really do not want to do this. In the back of the car are more papers than any teacher should ever have to grade, and they all have to be graded within a few days. And I'm thinking, okay, get to the hotel, grade the papers. I also know I'm going to meet with the librarians who are going to do this, 3 librarians who are going to take me to dinner. So, I get up to this hotel finally, and I'm really tired. It's been a day of teaching, a long day of driving. I know I've got a ton of grading to do that night. I really have to get to it, so I'm hoping this is going to be a fast dinner. And I go out with the librarians, and at the end of the dinner, because librarians are so tricky like this, you know how they are. At the end of the dinner, they go, you know, we have this boys club. It's sort of a reading club for at-risk readers. And they're meeting tonight about one of your books. Would you like to come? And in my heart, I'm thinking, no, I really don't. I really don't. I'm really tired. It's already 9 o'clock. I got papers to grade. Oh no, I really don't. And of course, what I said was, I'd love to. So we go in their car. It's still snowing. Go in their car. It's late. I mean, it's incredibly late. And we drive out of Houghton Lake. And suddenly there are no streetlights. And we're in the dark. And I'm thinking, really? And then suddenly we take a right-hand turn, and the snow is covered with a dirt road. And there are no lights anywhere. And I think, there's a Stephen King novel that's a lot like this. And it's a really, really bad ending. And we drive, and we drive, and we drive, and we drive. And suddenly in the distance there are bright lights. And I get to this, we get up there, and there is a building with no windows. There's no sign. And there are these bright lights on it. Cinder block building. So we get out. They don't say anything to me. And we walk up to this door. It's a steel door. It's a steel door. And we buzz in. And there's a buzz that answers, and the door opens. And we walk in. 6 feet away, there is another steel door. And there's a small window with that wire through it. You know those windows? And there's someone with a walkie-talkie on the other end. And I turn to these librarians and say, where are we? And they go, this is a medium security prison for boys. And I think, an at-risk book club? We're in a medium security prison? We go through another door, 3 doors, and then cross through the 4th door, and I see the first kiddo. And his head, there's a guard that has his hand in the back of this kid's head, just grabbing by the hair. And his face is shoved in a garbage can. And this kid is throwing up. And I think, we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. 2 more doors. There are 6 steel doors now between me and the exit. I'm not a claustrophobic person, I think. But 6 steel doors? 6? We get in, and there are 12 guys with 12 guards. 6 of them are from this medium security prison. 6 of them are from a maximum security prison 49 miles away. I don't know which is which. And they introduce themselves. And I think, what am I going to say to these guys? They're from ages 11 to 17. What am I going to say to them? But they've all read this one book. So the librarian asks, okay, why don't you tell Mr. Schmidt what character you identify with. And I think, oh no. What a horrible question. They're gonna just, oh no, this is really bad. And the first kid raises his hand. And he goes, Henry. And I say, really, Henry? Why? Because he's athletic. This kid goes, well, Henry isn't. He's not athletic in the book. But to this kid he was. Another kid raises his hand. He goes, black dog. And I go, really? Black dog in the book? He's not a pirate, he's a dog. He's like, he's a lab, he's a dog, tail barking. He's a dog. And I say to this guy, really? He's a dog. What do you see? And he goes, I've always wanted a dog. This kid will never have a dog. And then a third kid raises his hand. He goes, Che. And I say, why Che? And he says, because when Che's father looks at him, the only thing he can think about is, this is the kid that was born after my wife was raped. Like my father, he said. And suddenly it's, wow, a very different world. We talked for 2 hours. It was the most amazing talk I've ever had over any book, ever, or ever will have. And at the end of it, I was stunned that these kids, these 12 kids, had read the book and had worked so hard on it, and that they had liked it, One of the kids who came from the maximum security prison had almost not come because he had gotten too many demerits. The reason he had gotten demerits was that when he was in his cell, his solitary cell, he had kept his light on too long so he could read the novel. Do you know what that does to you? That a kid in a solitary cell had gotten in trouble for reading your book? I'll never forget it. There were 3 kids in the front. One is Jamal. He had spent that afternoon carving random numbers into his arm. He was bandaged but still bleeding. Another kid was named Joseph. This was the guy who had gotten in trouble. He sat the whole time with his arms like this. Prove yourself to me. It was great. And at the end he asked, if I wrote something, why would anyone ever read it? And I said, Joseph, send it to me. Would you read it? He said, I'll read it, I said. And his arms came down. First time. It took 2 hours. And there was Jake, who if he walked in here right now, if any of these 3 walked in here right now, they're normal middle school kids, you would say. But Jake is in the maximum security prison. If he came in, you would look at him and you'd say, wow, this is John Denver at age 11. And he looks like him. Just John Denver with the glasses and everything, the haircut, it was amazing. Jake also wants to be a writer, he said. And I said, Jake, what do you want to write about? And he says, the planets. I want to write about the planets. Jake, I said, what's your favorite planet? Jupiter. Jupiter is my favorite planet. Jake lives in a place where there are no windows. When we were done, I went back home. I sent Jake a copy of a poster of Jupiter, and I sent him a book on the planets. They were confiscated. Jake can have no personal materials at all. Jake's life is like this. At 4:30 today, 3 hours ago, Jake went into his solitary cell. He'll be let out again around 6:30 tomorrow morning, where he will have breakfast, and he will be in a space about this big with some of the other boys. And they will have some meaningless classes, because these are the kids Michigan, our country, has thrown away, has given up on. None of those kids that I just told you about, of those 12, none of them in a year has seen anyone related to them by blood. None. No parent, no sibling, no uncle, no aunt, no grandparent, none of them has seen anyone. The only people who came were these 3 librarians, and whoever they brought, whoever they tricked into going there. That was it. That was it. Why do we write for kids? I write for those 3 guys. I write for Jamal and Jake and Joseph, who live in this place, who have no other place to look outside except in a book. How many kids have no other place to look outside except in a book? A lot. More than we can even imagine. Live in through that. The writer Augustine, I bet you didn't think you'd hear about Augustine tonight. Augustine has a book called On Doctrine. And in this book, he asks what the role of a writer is to be. And here's what the role of a writer is to be, I think, in America today. He asks first, should a writer be the guy who brings beauty into the world? And then he says, well, yeah, of course. A writer should bring beauty into the world, of course. Then he asks, should a writer bring understanding into the world? Is that the job of the writer, to bring understanding, greater understanding? And he says, yeah, of course, the writer should bring greater understanding into the world. And then he asks, should a writer bring wisdom into the world, which is beyond understanding? Is that the job of the writer, to bring wisdom into the world? And he answers, of course. The writer is about bringing beauty and bringing understanding and bringing wisdom into the world. But then, he says, if the writer asks any of those questions, any of those, first, he's got it wrong. He's got it completely wrong. The question that the writer has to first ask before anything else is this: does the writing serve? Does the writing serve? And if it doesn't, today in America, then why do it other than to make money? Why be a hack? The writing must serve. And if it doesn't, then it's not worth doing. And I hope as I sit down every day, I'm thinking first, all right, what good does this do out in the world? And if it doesn't, then I better be doing something else. I don't know, running border collies or something. And I'm going to stop because I've yammered on long enough here. Questions that you guys might have, or things that you want to talk about, or whatever. Yeah.
Was that Nokomis treatment facility?
No, it was. Oh wait, yes, it was. How did you know that?
Because I worked there for 4 years.
Really? Oh, we should talk afterwards. Yeah, because I've heard that that's been disbanded now.
It has, yeah.
Yeah, so those kids are all gone.
Yeah, so I moved to the Maxim right my last year up in Grayling. So
We should definitely talk about this. Do you know those kids I just talked about? I don't know their
there
last
was a
names.
Jamal there, but not the other two names that I didn't recognize. So,
Because I've lost touch.
yeah.
Because they've been separated out. Other questions?
How come when you were sitting there in the school not doing the Wednesday church school, why didn't you just pick a religion and
Convert. You know, it was really different in schools back in the 60s, wasn't it? Because you would never, in a million years, ever question your teacher. Because the other obvious thing is, why don't I just tell my parents, hey, you know, I'm spending 2 hours a day, like, cleaning floors here, because I know my parents would have simply said, so? So? Who cares? I mean, it's what your teacher wants you to do. I mean, we never really made those sort of challenges to teachers back then. Today, I think that would be different. But certainly back then, it would never be something that you would challenge.
what did you need to do to go? Have a note from the parents saying you're going to such and such a...
To go to the religious instruction? I don't know. Since I obviously didn't have it, whatever they had, I absolutely did not have. It was the case though, all up and down, and this was all on Long Island, that all schools did that. And in my school, I was the only guy who was left behind.
If you wanted to be real enterprising, you could have started your own religion.
We could have worshipped Moloch or something and gone with that. Absolutely. Poseidon would have been interesting, and then I could have been Rick Riordan. Think how much money I would have made. Other questions, folks? Yeah.
How many books on average would you say that you read a year?
That I read?
Yeah.
Do you know, I'm actually still a slow reader, and I sometimes just blame first grade on it, but that's not there anymore. I read a lot of books that are going to be teaching, since I'm a full-time teacher as well. So a lot of my reading goes into that. So if you went to my car right now, there's Chaucer, because I'm going to be teaching the Mansible's Tale on Tuesday, and I know I have to get that down. And if I am, the books that I read, I tend to read mostly biography and mostly history, mostly because I know I can't use them. I'm not going to be taking notes or something on some other project I'm going to use. So I just read a long biography on Lord Nelson. I'm never going to write about Lord Nelson, but I love the book. And I'm reading one now called Swerve that won the National Book Award about Lucretius. I know, I can promise you that in the rest of my life, I'm not going to write about a 14th century manuscript dealing with Lucretius. And so I can read those and really just read them for pleasure. Novels at times. I'm reading Pete Hamill's now, newest one. I can't even remember the title. I'm on the National Book Award. I'm the chair of the committee of the National Book Award to choose the National Book Award for this next year's Young Adult or Young Readers Award winning. I said that very poorly. I'm on that committee. And I know that once that starts, probably next week, there'll be about 400 books to read between now and November 14th. This fills me with terror because I'm so slow on it. 400 books, and I'm hoping that a lot of them are really, really bad, so I can say at page 20, no, this has no chance to win, I'll put it away. But we'll see. Susan Cooper is on the committee, and that also fills me with terror. But we'll see how it goes. So not that many, really, just for pleasure. I bet it's probably just pleasure books, probably under a dozen. It takes me a long time. Yes, ma'am?
I see that you have medieval literature, and I'm wondering, have you placed all your books in current, and thinking that probably the current world would reach out and do something. Your books then would do something for the world today. Although honestly, when you were a kid, your Shakespearean stuff, did that. And yet, I mean, I would have thought, what a cool time to write about it. It was pretty violent and all that.
Not as violent as our own time, but pretty violent, absolutely. The 20th century has eclipsed all violence for every century before that, just by far.
Just more publicized.
I don't know. I think the numbers are really quite different. What you can do in a war in the 20th century is not at all what you can do in a war. I mean, you have wars in the medieval period where there are a handful of people killed. That's it. And it's not at all like what it is today. And the Middle Ages often gets a bad rap. I mean, witchcraft and the burning of it's all Renaissance. It's after the Middle Ages is all over. It's really cool. It's not at all the Middle Ages. I have thought every so often of writing about the medieval period, and I just not find the subject that I find interesting enough to make it work. And the setting and the voice and the narrator and the characters, they all have to really come together. And somehow that period, though I've written about it in academic work and in articles and such, and I teach it, I just haven't found it. And if you think about how many good works there are about the Middle Ages for young readers, wow, there ain't that many. There's one by Marguerite d'Angely called A Door on the Wall, and the brilliant, brilliant books of Karen Cushman, which are out of this world, fantastic, set in the 14th century. I just haven't felt called to that at all. And you have to feel like, yeah, this is the period, because you're going to live there for 2 years. You better make sure that you really, really like the place.
That's about how long it takes you to write your books?
At least 2 years, yeah. A year to do the first draft, and then a year to do all the revisions and to make it work, sometimes longer. The one I'm working on now, I'm in my 3rd year, because the revisions have been an absolute nightmare. But,
that and having the great homework.
I've got all these papers in my car right now, if you would like. I mean, yeah, there's a lot to do with that. Yeah, but you have to feel that the period is working for you and everything is working, and if it isn't, then... Yeah, a book that you are working hard at in the sense that you're really not all that interested in it, is just such a bore and so hard. Well, I was once asked to write a biography of L. Frank Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz. Has anyone here read The Wizard of Oz? I think it's awful. I mean, if you have to name a movie that's better than a book, the movie is infinitely better. It's incredibly better than the book. I think the book is terrible. So I read through that first one, and there's 8 of them, or 9 of them. And then after he died, they wouldn't shut up, and someone else took over the series, and there were another 14 or so. I read through the first one. I hated it beyond all hatred. I read through the second one, hated that one beyond all hatred. And we got halfway through the third one, like TikTok of Oz or something stupid like that. And I just said, oh, we're done. I'm just not going to write this book. And it was really because I didn't want to spend 2 years thinking about L. Frank Baum and his inept writing. I really do think he's inept as a writer. Great conception. His ideas are amazing. His writing is, well,
I had read somewhere that he was trying to do that as some sort of commentary on society.
Yeah, I think that's been added in later. I don't think he had this.
You're saying there's some historians that had too much time on their hands?
Yeah, that definitely is. His first project. Does anyone know his first book before he did Wizard of Oz? Okay, when you think of the Mother Goose poems, they depend on rhyme, right? And they depend on their rhythm and their cleverness of rhyme and rhythm. So L. Frank Baum's first book was to retell the Mother Goose poems in prose. It's called Mother Goose in Prose. I'm not making that up. It is actually one of the most collectible books in children's literature today because it's so hard to find anything by him for good reason. But that one, you just think, really? Really? That's your idea? You're going to write a book where you take the Mother Goose poems and you make them prose? Really? And that got published? No, he was a bore.
So if you were reading biography and history, knowing, because then you'd feel safe that you would never write about that, do you feel like then that would not be original? You're trying to find something really original and not...
It's more that I want to be able to write something and not think that I have to take notes on it. You know, not write something, but read something. I want to come to the end of the day and I want to open this book and I don't want a pencil in my hand. I just want to read it for the sheer pleasure of it. I read my favorite writer right now is a guy named Patrick O'Brien, and he wrote, does anyone know his stuff? A brilliant series of books, the Matron Aubrey series. The film Master and Commander was sort of based on it. So I think it was the 6th volume, though they named it after the first volume. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant writer. But I eventually stopped reading him because I just started to take too many notes. And he became the guy that you work at, you learn from, but not the guy I read for pleasure or for relaxing. I mean, he's brilliant. He's got this scene. This taught me so much. He's got this. Do you want to hear this? I mean, he's got this scene with Aubrey, who's the admiral or the captain, I should say, who's brilliant on land. I'm sorry, brilliant at sea, but stupid on land. And there's Matron, the doctor, who's brilliant on land, but stupid at sea. So they're standing on the ship together, and Aubrey says to Matron, Stephen, look over there to port side. No, Stephen, port side. Now that's brilliant, because he suddenly left out the whole interior action. That Stephen hasn't looked to port side, he's looked the other way, he's looked starboard. And he doesn't say it, because all he's done is to say, no, Stephen, port side. And you as a reader have to fill in the entire action that's just happened there. I love that stuff. I think that's fantastic, and he is brilliant at it. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any say the covers of your book?
I laugh ruefully because the answer is no. It's really quite astonishing how little you have in terms of ability to affect the final outcome of a book. And in some way it makes sense. If I'm Houghton Mifflin and I'm going to publish this and it's going to cost me $150,000 to get this print run out, I should have a lot of say in how it looks. And the marketers are the ones who make those calls. So on that entire cover, or on any cover, the only thing that a writer gets to do is that small section on the back flap, not the back cover, but the back flap, that talks about the writer, that section, and you write that in third person, as if you're not writing it. Everything else about the cover is completely outside of your control. And their notion is, well, this is our thing, we know what we're doing here, we know how to track the eye, because covers are all about marketing. That's even true of the titles, by the way. Titles are not the authors in general. In fact, it's very rare that an author gets the title he goes in with. It's usually done by editors and marketers, and then you get a list, and you run through the list, and you negotiate those out. So the original title of this one was Doug, just Doug, which I really, really liked. And Wednesday Wars was one of my few titles. I can't even think of the others. Troubles was Till We Come to Katahdin. Lizzie Brighton the Buckminster Boy was Till We Touch the Whales Off the Island, or something like that. And they just choose, no, it's not going to work. And it's the same with picture books. If you write a picture book as a writer, you send in your 400 words, and it is about 400 words, and then you're done. It goes to the illustrator with the art director and everything. Which words appear on which page? Are there pages with no words? Are there pages with lots? What do the illustrations look like? What gets illustrated? What doesn't? What's the quality of this? I mean, all of that is outside your realm. So as a picture book writer, you really are taking a huge chance. And I've only done a few of them, maybe for this reason. I'm German and I'm from New England. I have too much control issues. But the notion of just handing over your text to someone and not having any control over how it looks, that makes me really nervous. The last picture book actually just came out last week, and it's called The Rose in the Desert, and it was David Diaz who did the illustration, so I was pretty sure about him. But I've seen others that just, well, I don't do them anymore. There's a book on a saint named Ciaran that I did. I know, I'm sure I did this either. In the book, he has a doe. A doe comes to this monastery in Ireland and hangs out, and it's clearly said every single time in the text it's a doe. So when the illustrations come, and I have no say in this, the illustrations come, and it's all about to be published, I see it for the first time, and on this doe, there are antlers. There are antlers on this doe, and I call them up and I say, guys, he's painted a buck, and it's a doe. It says it every single time. And so they go, we'll get back to you. And so they got back to me a few days later, and they said, here's the answer. He's from New Jersey. And I said, really? So does in New Jersey have antlers? And they said, well, he just doesn't know that. And I said, I know that. And they go, every kid in America, they won't know that. Kids won't know. And I said, I live in Michigan. Every single kid in America, every single kid in Michigan will know that that's wrong, that that's a buck that's been illustrated and it's not a doe. But it was too late. And so if you get the book today, it says a doe comes up, and I look at the page, and every single time I think, those antlers, it just drives me nuts. And even in book covers, the first cover for Lizzie Bright and the Buckminster Boy has Lizzie rowing. And every time I look at that, I think, oh, she's in a small rowboat, and she is rowing, and Turner is in the front, which is okay. It never happens in the book, but okay, I can deal with that. The problem is that here's the stern, here's the bow. She should be facing which way? She should be facing this way to row, and she's facing this way. She's facing this way. And so I called up again the publisher and got about exactly the same answer. I said, she's facing the wrong way. And they said, as if this is a script they use, well, we'll get back to you. And they got back to me. And they said, Stefano was his name. Stefano is from Italy. What? So in Italy they row rowboats facing forward? Well, it turns out that they do. In fact, if you think about like a gondolier going through Venice, they're at the back and they are facing forward. And I said, we're not in Italy, we're off the coast of Maine. I mean, come on. And they go, well, yeah, it's just too late. And so if you ever see a hardcover copy of that book, there she is, rowing in the wrong direction. And then in the paperback copy, they fixed it. And then they did the second paperback copy, this one, in which, I don't even ask anymore because it's just crazy. In this one, there is never a canoe in the entire book. There's no canoe. But here you have a canoe instead of the rowboat. And he's standing up. He's standing up in the stupid canoe. And I'm like, give me a break. Do you guys ever go on the water? And the answer is no. Isn't that amazing? I mean, he's standing up in the stupid canoe. Well, anyway, so that's the line. So it's a long answer to that question. Other questions?
Like the buck and doe thing, I'd worry about my own reputation, like your name as the author. Do most people know that you're not associated? I guess I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I know there's a separate illustrator,
that's valid. And so what I've tried to do is to make sure I get to see them first. And it has never been the case in a picture book that I've been able to go through and it's fine. It's just okay. There's a book called The Wonders of Donald O'Donnell, and in the text it reads his pale green eyes. It says pale green. It says pale green. I mean, it couldn't be more obvious. Really pale, and it makes a big point of the fact that they're pale. So the illustrations came, and his eyes are black. And I called again, and I said, guys, I mean, it's just a complete conflict. His eyes are black. And they said, you're right, you'll have to change it. And the book was so far in advance that I had to change it, and I couldn't take out black and put in pale. I couldn't take out pale green and put in black because there are more letters and spaces in pale green than there are in the word black. And I had to take out exactly the number of spaces and letters that I put in. So I ended up taking out the entire line and choosing words, no kidding, by how many letters there were in the word. and it became something like the hawthorn berry dark of his eyes, or something like that. Something really bizarre, because I had to fit it in. And I did a Bible story set once, a set of Bible stories, and there is a story of Daniel in the lion's den. And in the story it says he's dressed in prison robes. Prison, I mean, it's very clear, prison robes. And when the image came back from Dennis Nolan, who's a great illustrator, he's wearing these beautiful, courtly, I mean, jewels. Oh, it's just fantastic. And it's a beautiful illustration, but it's wrong. And so I call up again, and they must hate me. And I call up again, and I go, guys, it's like completely wrong. And they said again, yeah, you're right, you'll have to change it. And so that all had to come out. And there's all sorts of famous ones, the most famous being Homer Price by Robert McCloskey. Do you remember him? Blueberries for Sal and all that sort of stuff. He tells a story in which there are, if I get this right, 4 robbers. But in the original draft, there were 5, and he takes one out. So when he takes it out, he redraws all the pictures for the 4 robbers, and then he sends them in. The book's about to be published, and he's been drafted. So he's now in basic training in, I don't know, somewhere in the South. And the publisher calls him up and says, he's in basic training. He calls him up and they go, we need another picture. And he couldn't remember if there were 4 robbers or 5 robbers. And he remembered that there was this 5th one that he liked, but he thought he had taken it out, but he wasn't sure. So finally he just goes, oh, dang it. And he draws the drawing, and he puts them in a bed all together. And 5 of them. What's wrong? And so if you go to the book today, Homer Price, and you look for I think it's the first story, it's the story of the skunk or something like that, and you watch the robbers, there's 4 in every picture, there's 4 in the text, except for this one, in which there are 5 robbers. And there's artists who are really, really powerful. Maurice Sendak. There's a book called The 7 Little Monsters, which is his most sought-after book today. The reason being is that when he drew all the monsters, the 5th one, I think it is, was Swedish. And then suddenly in the last one, he changed it as a joke to make him look like Adolf Hitler. And somehow that picture got sent to the publisher. And so when the book came out, all the monsters appeared the same on all the pages, except on one page, this very blonde Swedish monster is suddenly transformed into Adolf Hitler. And then it goes back. And Sendak was so upset about it, of course, and he has authority here, he had them all removed and destroyed. And so to get a first edition with that particular change in there, it's wicked hard, really, really hard to find. So if you ever find it in a bookstore, 7 Little Monsters, Maurice Sendak, it's like this big. And if you see this 5th, I think it's the 5th giant who's changed, you got to pick it up. It's probably worth something to someone. Yeah, so I actually do, and that's why I don't do picture books much anymore, because if you know that that's going to be the case, and you have those battles to fight, I just don't want to do that.
I'd have no idea. I would assume it was the authors doing it.
Exactly.
You'd have more power.
Exactly, yeah, but you don't. It's actually astonishing how little power you get once the book is out in the world.
You get them to put a little blurb on there that says, author is not responsible for pictures or titles.
No, it's just assumed. It's just assumed.
I know I've read some science fiction books where the cover illustration has nothing to do with whatever is in it.
Exactly, but the cover illustration is meant to get you to buy it. And that's a marketing event. And so you don't even have to read the dang thing, you just have to have some picture that's going to drag the reader into it. And I get that.
Sort of like the National Enquirer.
With different kinds of pictures. Yes. Folks, thank you so much for coming. I've kept you so long.